What's up, bodyweight warriors, and welcome back to another video. And today we're going to be answering the common question that is always on this channel in some form, and that is, how long does it take me to achieve this thing? In this case, we're going to be talking about the handstand because it's fun and it's something that is quite an accessible skill to a lot of people. But for one reason or another, not everyone gets there. And this is kind of what I want to tackle today. I want to give you a realistic expectation about how long it's going to take to achieve a handstand. Plus, I also want to talk about the process of learning it, because ultimately there's lots of tutorials out there, mine included, that are great for giving you the progressions, but the progressions don't always cover actually how do you learn a skill? How do you go through the process of going from nothing to something? That in itself needs to be talked about. So that's what we're going to touch on in today's video. Very quickly, let me just get this out of the way to begin with. I think most people can achieve a handstand within a 2 to 6 month window. And when I say achieve a handstand, I would put a number on that as being roughly a consistent 10-second handstand, regardless of how the handstand itself looks. It could look like a banana, it could look lovely and straight. Balancing something for 10 seconds. Personally, for me, it took me about 2 months of consistent training, past the point of probably a couple of months before that of just messing around doing the odd handstand here and there. Equally, I've had clients who have gone from nothing to 10-second handstand in 6 weeks, and I've had some clients who have taken 6 to 8 months to achieve the same feat. Ultimately, it does vary individually. There are many reasons for that, and I want to share with you some reasons that maybe you're not seeing the progress that you're after, or some pitfalls that you can come across in the actual learning, not the progressions, not the tutorial, the learning of it. So let's jump into that one. First of all, I want to mention the starting point, because that makes a massive difference to how long it might take you to learn a handstand. Ultimately, like many things in life, preparation is key. Have you done some form of physical activity? Could literally be anything. You know, do you have some body awareness versus do you not? Ultimately, the handstand is a little bit unusual. It's a little bit, you know, we're not supposed to stand on our wrists and our shoulders, but for some reason we decided that we're at the point in human evolution where that's now a thing that we're going to do. So that needs to be addressed. You need to spend some time building up the capacity to do so. And this is really the biggest pitfall that a lot of people get when they start learning to handstand. You need to build up the strength and the capacity in the wrists and the shoulders to handle being able to do handstands, and certainly more handstands, because ultimately the more you can practice it, the more you're going to get better at it. The handstand is a highly neurological skill, benefits from frequent and consistent practice. I'd actually highly recommend checking out a video here on YouTube by Geek Climber. I've seen him do a few videos, actually some great videos. He has one in particular where he learns a handstand in 150 days. And that, for me, typifies the typical experience of somebody learning to handstand. They spend 20 days pissing about with handstands, and most people don't see any progress and they don't get past that point. Exactly what he ended up going through in the video. But instead of giving up, he's obviously a smart guy, and he went down the route of, okay, let's build some capacity for handstands. And he just did pike handstands, which is a great example of a tool to condition and build up strength in the shoulders. And that's all he did for like the next 100 days. The majority of the time that it took him to learn the handstand was about building the base. And he made pretty fast and good progress in the last 30 days because of that base that he had built. This is also important because ultimately we increase our risk of injury when we go from 0 or something to 100. And that's often the case when we go from not standing on our hands to standing on our hands. We can get wrist injuries, you can get shoulder injuries. The best way to make no progress is to get injured. So if you can avoid that and make a good preparation at the same time, you're going to have some success when looking after the skill. Now, as I said, if you do want some help with this, then I would highly recommend going, I've got my handstand tutorial, which I'll link down below, as well as a couple of others that I think are good. And I'll also link to my app Tribe, in which there is a handstand program in there, levels 1 to 10, 0 to nothing, if you want some more specific guidance. But for me here, for most people, it's basically going to be doing a chest to wall handstand or something like the pike stand that he did in this video. You're going to want to do that so it's kind of comfortable and easy for 30 seconds. You're then probably not going to have a problem with the wrists, the shoulders, or just the ability to get into a handstand that's going to get in the way of you learning to balance it. Next up, I want to talk about the practice. Now, this is the bit that is not usually covered on handstand tutorials, and it is kind of the most important part when it determines the success of somebody learning the handstand or not. As I mentioned beforehand, handstands are highly neurological in nature. They take a lot to learn, and for this reason, we need to do it frequently. Most people piss about with handstands. That's why they don't end up getting the handstand. You know, as I said to begin with, it took me 2 months to learn to handstand, but before that point, I was pissing about for 2 months trying to, you know, do something. Ultimately, I didn't see any progress, and that's fine if that's you have fun with that. But in my opinion, doing the thing is more fun. So, you know, may as well take it seriously for a short period of time. If you're not training handstands 3, maybe 4 times a week, in the early stages, you're not really going to see the progress that you want. This doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get better benefit from doing 6 to 7 times a week, because as we mentioned, the best way to make no progress is to get injured. And if you go from 0 to 100, the chance of injury goes up. So start slow, build your way up to it. The next part of this practice element is understanding the notion progress in handstand, especially as a beginner, tends to be exponential. And what that means essentially is initially it's very little, and then as we get a little bit more time, it begins to compound and dramatically increase. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, you've got to build up that base, that foundation. That does take time to learn before you can actually put together the balancing aspect. And the second reason is simply that, to begin with, it's just very, very hard to get enough time balancing to get the stimulus we need to progress. Let me give you a very simple example. Let's say we need 100 seconds of time balancing to make good progress. This is an arbitrary number, just easy for the sake of time. If you can balance a handstand for 10 seconds, then we can do that in about 10 sets. Pretty easy, pretty good amount of time balancing. We're going to make actually probably pretty fast progress with whatever it is that we're training. When we're learning to handstand, let's say that we can only maybe hold 1 to 2 seconds here and there. That's going to take us 50 to 100 sets to get to that same 100 seconds of time balancing. It's just, it's impossible to do in a single training session, and ultimately just means it's going to take much more time to get that stimulus and get those results. And this is why for a lot of people, it will take them the same amount of time to go from nothing to like a second or two here and there, to go from that second or two to actually a 10-second handstand. That last bit, that jump, tends to be quite quick. It's the time beforehand, that preparation, that takes the long amount of time. And again, this was something that was reflected in the video that I mentioned earlier. So lastly, I just want to finish by giving you some process goals. Process goals are really helpful because with a lot of these skills, you either can or you can't. You can't or you can. And there's kind of a bit of a chasm in between. And sometimes you just feel like, you feel like, what's the point? I'm never going to get there. It's impossible. Having some things to tick off along the way can be very useful mentally to stay on track. So I've got just a handful of very basic recommendations here. Number one is 30-second wall handstand, chest to wall handstand, back to wall. 30 seconds should be easy. You don't want to be thinking about that. Therefore, you're going to have the capacity in the wrists and also the shoulders to deal with just being able to do handstand. That's an important one to tick off. Next up, we want to actually have an awareness of what it feels like to create balance rather than randomly find it. Now, this is a bit more ambiguous than like hold a handstand for 30 seconds. Ultimately, what this would look like is the person who can't create balance would be somebody who's on a wall handstand, they're pushing off the foot. That's random, that's chaotic. Whereas if we do things properly, we have the foot on the wall and we can lift the foot off. We're actually creating balance momentarily. We're getting the sensation of what it feels like to be in balance, even just for a split second. You'll know what that feels like because before that point, it feels like a struggle to even get something that feels like that falling sensation. You'll know, trust me. The next process goal is equally a little bit ambiguous, and that is not necessarily to hold a certain time frame, but to be able to hold a handstand with one correction. The reason I say this is because you could hold a 5-second handstand that actually is kind of like a slow fall. You're constantly falling in one direction. It just takes you 5 seconds to fall out of that position. That for me isn't really balancing, kind of is, but it's not really. What I'd be looking for here is your ability to apply a correction. So let's say we're going to fall in one direction, then we can correct it. Maybe we squeeze the fingers, maybe push in a different direction, and then we go and fall the opposite way. Maybe we only hold a handstand for a second, but you've demonstrated the ability to make a correction and be aware of how it feels to create balance. Again, it's a little ambiguous, but hopefully that makes sense. Next, 5-second handstand. I know I said I don't like times, but really, if you can hold a handstand for 5 seconds, you probably would have done a correction or two at that point. And I think 5 seconds is a good number to focus on hitting. Certainly, I would say 5 seconds, not just like a one-off, but like you can do 2 to 3 times in a session, you can hit 5 seconds. And then really after that, it's 10 seconds. 10-second handstand, once you can hit that, ultimately, you're going to have very little barrier to actually learning your handstand. It's just going to come down to more of a mindset. There may be like a period of time where you can't because you're kind of doubting yourself and all these sort of things come into it. But ultimately, as long as you stay consistent with things, you're probably going to have a handstand of some form for life. This is really where it depends on where you want to go with it. Do you want to go down the handstand route? Do you want to become a hand balancer? Do you want to go deep into that practice? I've been doing handstands now for 6 years, something that I really love. It's something that's great for traveling, and it's just good fun. But ultimately, for some people, they've done a handstand for 10 seconds, they're happy. Take it off, move on to the next thing. But that's basically my opinion on learning to handstand, or certainly how long it might take. I would love for you to join the conversation. Let me know in the comment section down below what your opinion is on this one. Maybe share your own personal journey for those of you also reading the comments. It's always interesting to hear. If you just enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button and support the channel. Right next to it is that subscribe button if you want to join the Bodyweight Warrior Tribe. Don't miss out on any more future videos. But other than that, I'll catch you in the next episode. Have a strong week and peace.